Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. Look, folks, I think we can agree the world's a pretty confusing place right now. This decade will probably mint the world's first trillionaire, yet 800 million people still live in extreme poverty. Solar costs have plummeted by 90% in the last decade, yet the world consumed record numbers of fossil fuels in the last year. And maybe the most confusing thing of all is that Arsenal's top of the Premier League. Now, when I say that, I see three reactions in the room. Some people are like, yeah, no, down with the Gunners. A third of you are like, arse what? Arse what? And then a third of you are going to kill me after this, recognizing where we are in the city. So, moving swiftly along. Look, I think understanding these paradoxes that we are in this world is the first step to resolving them. We now know clearly that when it comes to inequality, tax systems and the way they're built entrench inequality. And we also know that if we don't find a way to retire fossil fuel assets, what we'll end up with is an energy addition from renewables rather than an energy transition. And I would say that in 2025, mining also sits squarely in the middle of these paradoxes. The headlines are quite interesting. They shout about soaring minerals demand, looming shortages, and an urgent need for new mines. The G7, the G20, the IEA, the UN, every major body has critical minerals at the top of their agenda. And over 100 countries have national critical mineral strategies. Never has mining had so much global attention. Yet, metal plants are closing. Major mining companies are restructuring. And outside of gold and copper, prices are weaker. New projects are stalling. And the entire mining sector is valued at less than a third of NVIDIA. What is going on? Something doesn't seem to add up. Look, in my opinion, this disconnect comes down to at least three paradoxes. These paradoxes are rarely understood outside niche corners of the mining industry, and so my hope is that by naming them, we can start to unlock the collective action needed to achieve the mission of resourcing tomorrow that Andrew set out for us, a responsible and resilient mining supply chain. So let me just illustrate each of those three paradoxes to you with a specific case and then describe the broader implications of it. And I want to try and focus on American copper, European aluminium, and mining pretty much everywhere. And when I quote some numbers in each of these, do note they're rounded up or down. So look, firstly, when it comes to copper in the United States and North America more broadly, I see here a paradox of demand without supply. You see, the US consumes around 2 million tons of copper a year. We know that without copper, we can't have electrification, we can't have infrastructure, and we can't live in cities. That demand from the US will probably double in a decade. Yet, the country has 2 operating smelters. China has 200. Now, you might think, well, that's okay, because its northern neighbor, Canada, will fill the gap. Well, except that Canada likes the US less than I like Arsenal, and it has even fewer smelters. It has 1, and that last smelter in Canada, the Horn smelter, is reportedly at risk of closing. So how is it that the world's largest economy, with one of the most predictable long-term demand forecasts for copper, cannot secure supply of a metal that it deems critical? The answer is brutally simple. It's economics. Now, bear with me, please, for a minute of a deep dive into how the copper supply chain works. You see, most mines, they sell concentrate. Refiners will take that concentrate and they'll convert it into what's known as blister copper, into anodes and cathodes. Those refiners and smelters will charge the miners a fee for doing so. Now that's quoted, this fee is quoted as an annual benchmark, but there are also spot deals between individual miners and refiners. For a decade, again, remember I've rounded these numbers, for a decade, that charge that refiners and smelters charge the miners hovered around $80 a ton. In 2025, it collapsed to as low as minus $80 a ton in some cases. Just think about that for a second. Smelters and refiners are now paying miners for the privilege of refining their concentrate while absorbing the costs of doing so. It's like your dry cleaner paying you to valet your shirts. It doesn't make sense. But why is it happening? Well, it's happening because smelters, they need feedstock to survive. It's not so easy to turn a smelter on and off willy-nilly. And yet, that global concentrate they need is very tight. Why? Because several major mines are either offline or underproducing relative to nameplate capacity. And so with smelters being utilized at a record low of around 75%, they're desperate to get their hands on concentrate. Now, considering the lack of new mines coming on stream, the situation I've just described to you may well be our new normal. Now, state-backed players, particularly in China, can absorb those losses because they get the benefit of a state subsidy. Western smelters cannot. And neither can most of the producer countries that are increasingly demanding in-country beneficiation of minerals. And so, the result, a metal that is deemed critical, with soaring demand and high prices, is still starved of new mines and smelting capacity. Now, the situation in Europe is arguably even more dire. And this reveals the uncomfortable truth, which is that Western free market rules are clashing with state-directed competitors. Governments will need to choose: embrace industrial policy or accept ongoing vulnerability. So that's the story of American copper. Let me tell you the second paradox, which is about European aluminium. And here, there's a paradox between a green ambition without affordable energy. You see, here in Europe, we produce around 5 million tons of aluminium. We consume around 3 times that. Now, the gap between that demand and supply will rise to 2030 and then rise again to 2050. Prices for aluminium are strong. They're up 45% since 2020. Now, aluminium and alumina and bauxite, which are used to make aluminium, are on the EU's critical minerals list. So, with all of that, you would expect a thriving aluminium industry here in Europe. No. In fact, companies are shutting down their extrusion lines, extrusions referring to the end product of aluminium production, and they're also cutting midstream production. Why? Why is this happening? Well, I think 3 forces are colliding here in Europe. The first is high energy prices. You see, aluminium is best described as solid electricity. That's how much energy it takes to produce it. And Europe has some of the most expensive power in the world. Now, that alone, just power costs alone, make European production between 400 and 600 euros a ton more expensive than in China or the US. To put that 400 or 600 in context, aluminium prices are currently around 2,600 euros a ton. Look, expensive energy means less aluminium, full stop. The second thing that's happening in the aluminium industry here in Europe is a well-intentioned but flawed CBAM. Now, what CBAM refers to is the Carbon Border Adjustments Mechanism, something I've personally been a huge fan and advocate for a long time, because it aims to protect European industry from dirtier imports. But its current design risks doing exactly the opposite. You see, in the EU CBAM design today, aluminium scrap is treated as zero emissions. So what that means is, as a foreign producer, I have an incentive to over-declare the amount of scrap that's in the aluminium that I may export into the EU. And in the absence of a system to verify that, there's no way anybody is going to hold me to account. And that gives me, as a foreign producer, a price advantage of somewhere between 3 and 7% over EU producers. If you go further, under CBAM, indirect emissions in production, so from power generation, are excluded entirely. And so carbon-heavy grids abroad go unpenalized, while EU producers pay the full cost of electricity-related emissions. And the result? Aluminium producers in Europe who generate aluminium at 60% less CO2 than the global average are penalized. Instead, we get higher carbon imports. And the third factor affecting the industry here is US tariff, of course. There's a 50% tariff now on European aluminium, which means that essentially it's priced out of the American market. Look, there's not much Europe can do about that, but better energy prices and a better designed CBAM would have meant less overall pain. So folks, the lesson from the story of European aluminium for critical minerals more broadly is this: no metal industry can survive, let alone compete, without cheap, reliable energy. In a geopolitically fractured world, that's even more important. So my final paradox that I want to talk to you about is about mining everywhere. And here, there's a paradox between the urgent need and a lack of innovation adoption. So this is internal. If the first two I talked about American copper and European aluminum, were about external conditions facing the industry, this one is a mirror that we need to hold up to ourselves. You see, mining has never needed innovation more. Permitting is slow, environmental and social expectations are rising, demand is surging, and companies have rightly, especially ICMM members, pledged low-carbon, nature-positive, minimal waste mining. So this should be the golden age of innovation in the mining industry. Instead, every innovator I've spoken to in the last year tells me some version of the following same story. Our solution improves safety, efficiency, or both. We've proven it works in real conditions, but we cannot get companies to bring us on site. Now, just some of these innovations that I've had a chance to experience in the last year include a reactor which boosts cementation efficiency and metal recovery, a biological method for leaching copper from low-grade primary sulfide ores, and entirely new extraction methods like hyperaccumulator plants or tapping mineral-rich brines. So why are these innovators blocked? Look, money is always a pretty safe answer in situations like this. And that is true. Mining chronically underinvests in research and development. We spend in the region of 0.5% of our revenue on what might be termed traditional R&D, and that compares to between 6 and 14% for pharmaceuticals and technology. But I think the issue is deeper. The issue for why mining has not innovated at the pace we should have is cultural. We have a well-intentioned but counterproductive view of risk. You see, new in mining equals risky. And an industry that is rightly obsessed with safety, risky is often a conversation ender. But the truth is, innovation is not inherently unsafe. What is unsafe is refusing to evolve while pressures intensify around us. This is cultural work. It's deep, long-term, values-driven change, and it needs to start now. That's as much a call to action as a reminder to myself, because I think issues like this may need an industry-wide response. So, let me conclude by saying, if we're serious about building responsible and resilient mineral value chains in the way that Resourcing Tomorrow 2025 is imploring us to do, then we have to go beyond the headlines and confront the real forces at play, of which there are at least 3. The economics and geopolitics that make processing uncompetitive without support, the energy and carbon pricing systems that metals are highly sensitive to, and the cultural barriers in mining that hold back innovation. That sounds like a lot. And before we get too despondent, remember this: if Arsenal can top the Premier League, then truly anything is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.